The High Court's reasons it came out this afternoon behind that landmark ruling to release foreign detainees from indefinite detention all came about regarding a Burmese criminal, NZYQ. And the court found that holding him in detention was beyond the legislative power of the Commonwealth Parliament. In their full judgment, the High Court also green-lighted the use, as we talked about with Andrew Connell, of existing preventative detention systems for detainees where it might apply, and this is the foreign criminals, where there's concern they have an unacceptable risk of reoffending. Now, I'll note one of the people released already out on detention is now on the run. He refused to wear a monitor. The police presumably walked away. I don't know why they did that, but they walked away. And as soon as they did, off he went. And this shows just how chaotic the whole response from the Albanese government has been to date. Joining me now to discuss this, Shadow Attorney General, Michaelia Cash. Well, Michaelia, give us your take. You've got a legal background, former Attorney General and now, of course, the Shadow. Give us your take on the reasoning that we've had from the High Court today and where we go from here.
Well, Peter, what can you say? Complete, total and utter incompetence by the Albanese government. In the first instance, the case applied to one person. The facts applied to one person. The orders applied to one person. So the Albanese government now needs to tell the Australian people why, when it did not have the High Court's reasons, did it rush to release in excess of now 140 foreign criminals? One, which you have rightly pointed out, is actually on the run.
Michaelia, can I just jump in there? Because nobody else has put that out there in the media today that I have seen anywhere. So are you saying that your reading of that judgment meant they only had to let the Burmese rapist out? They didn't have to do what they've done and release the 141 or the 140 other people. So why didn't they just wait for the final release of the High Court's reasoning before moving on anyone beyond the original claimant?
And that is a very good question, Peter, because again, High Court decision, one detainee, facts of the case, one detainee, orders in relation to one detainee. They need to tell the Australian people why, absent the reasons for the decision, they rushed to let these people out, because it would appear that they actually put the rights of detainees as they saw them above the safety and security of the Australian people. But in relation to the decision, what does the decision actually say? Well, it green lights what Peter Dutton, James Paterson and the Coalition have been saying from day one. Bring in a preventative detention scheme. And what has the government said? They have been clear. They will not do it because they can't do it. Well, guess what? Paragraph 72 of the High Court's reasons today clearly blow that out of the water, because the High Court itself, and Peter, it's not often the High Court tells a government what it can and can't legislate. No. But the High Court was pretty clear here, preventative detention, something that Peter Dutton has said from day one this government should have done. So quite frankly, and James Paterson said it himself today, we are ready to go. Bring in the legislation. We will sit until it is passed. It's in the government's hands now. I'm waiting to see what they do, Peter. I don't hold out high hopes.
So if I was cynical here, Michaelia Cash, you could say when the decision was made, before we see the reasons for judgment, which we see now today, when the decision was made and they really were only on the hook to release one detainee, the fact that the government decided they'd release basically the whole lot says to me that Labor, particularly with a hard left flank, is very uncomfortable with the idea of border protection or indeed detention. So they thought, let's just get this issue resolved, let's sweep them all out and blame it on the High Court. But then there's an almighty cry by the Australian public who say these people are some pretty bad foreign criminals. We owe them nothing. Why are they on the street? What's the protections for us? And of course, the coalition has held the government's feet to their fire. As this, though, has gone on for the 2-week period, we can see how utterly incompetent they have been all the way through. I suspect, unless the coalition did what it did, there'd be no ankle bracelets. There wouldn't even be now this pressure on them put in preventative detention.
Peter, when we were first briefed by Claire O'Neill and Andrew Giles, so Peter Dutton, Michaelia Cash, James Patterson, Dan Tehan, I can tell you right now, the initial legislation, they swore black and blue it was as tough as they could make it. Within minutes, we'd identified faults. Within hours, we drafted 6 amendments, which we then handed to the government and said, this makes your legislation tougher. And guess what? They fell over there and then and accepted the amendments. If only they'd listened to Peter Dutton, who, let's face it, that is a man who puts the safety and security of Australians first and foremost. He's spent time in this portfolio. He knows what you can and can't do. He called for a preventative detention regime. Why in God's name didn't the government just say, look, we'll have a crack at it? Because guess what? Paragraph 72, High Court decision, unanimous decision, Peter, it green lights it. In fact, it doesn't just green light it, it almost encourages it.
Yeah, and I played a grab from him last night in the chamber, absolutely making this point well before we obviously have that judgment reasoning released by the High Court. I must say, my colleague Andrew Clennell's uncovered all of these emails, of course, that were filed in court documents that seem to be at odds with what the minister was doing via her department with the US State Department, conversations being held over there in relation to this Burmese individual, and what she was telling the Parliament, what she was telling the Australian public through the media. I have to say, you rarely see such incompetence right across the board here from an individual. Surely she's got to go.
Peter, there are some very serious questions now that Claire O'Neill has to answer. Because if you go to, I think it's around paragraph 63 of the decision, it clearly states there were some accepted facts. In other words, the government agreed something. What did the government agree? It agreed that in May of this year, there was no prospect of removing this person from Australia. That was an agreed fact, which the High Court then clearly states in its judgment took into consideration. The actions of the minister and the emails that you have now uncovered clearly show why did they agree that fact, send the High Court down a particular path when they were continuing to look for other options. There is a lot that now needs to come out, and I think Claire O'Neill has some very serious questions she now needs to answer.
Just quickly, we're also getting legislation to deal with the issue of a dual citizenship for convicted terrorists. We know that there was again a High Court decision. There's long been a view that the Parliament needs to legislate to fix this up. The government said they'd do it as soon as they got in. It hasn't happened yet. One of the worst criminals, convicted terrorists we have is a guy called Ben Breaker. He's in prison. He's trying to get out on parole. And of course, he has now had, it was taken away by Peter Dutton, he has now had his Australian citizenship returned. I find out last night from James Patterson that in fact, even with the government's draft legislation, should it pass, it's not retrospective. It will do nothing about this bloke, Ben Breaker. Now, surely that also needs to be fixed up.
Oh, look, absolutely. And again, we were briefed on this legislation. And the first question Peter Dutton asked was, does it apply to Ben Breaker? And Claire O'Neill said no. You've got to be kidding me. This is a government that just reacts. It scrambles to put things together and then it fails miserably on so many occasions. Why wasn't the government prepared? In relation to this particular detainee in today's decision, in May of this year, the government should have been preparing for an outcome that it means it could lose. And instead, what's Claire O'Neill saying? Oh, we thought we were going to win. I mean, Peter, governments prepare for the worst and the best case scenario. The same with the Benbrika decision, the best and the worst case scenario. This government doesn't seem to prepare at all. Now, that worries me because I come from the side of politics. You come from the side of politics that says the safety and the security of the Australian people is the first and foremost priority of a Commonwealth government. Mr Albanese doesn't have the backs of the Australian people. That should really start to worry Australians, because the one thing you want your Prime Minister to have, it's your back.